All right, so welcome everyone. My name's Jackie. I'm a educational developer at the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about research questions. So how might we design impactful research questions and methods for the scholarship of teaching and learning, so SoTL. This is a second workshop in a series of workshops that we have on SoTL. So the first one was last month. That was an introduction to SoTL. So if you were able to make that workshop, thank you for coming back. I'm excited to have you here again. If you weren't able to make last month's workshop, you can reach out to me and I can send you the slides for that workshop. The intent of this series is really to give you a sense of what SoTL is and how you might engage in SoTL projects in your own ways and in your own capacities. And so hopefully these workshops will give you sort of a foundational set of skills that you can employ in your own work. Yeah, like I said, if you want a copy of these slides, you can scan that QR code. And we're going to just dive right into it. So I am presenting and living on the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound these peoples to share the territory and protect the land in which I live and work. And most likely, I know some of you also live and work. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. One thing I always try to be mindful of with land acknowledgements is the risk of performance and the risk of sounding performative and how performative these types of acknowledgements can become in the absence of real work and real effort towards reconciliation and learning. And so I encourage all of us here today to continue to learn and do more to challenge the history of settler colonialism here in Canada. Some of the resources that have been helpful for me are shared down below there. So nativeland.ca, that gives you a sense of whose land you're on when it comes to where you reside and where you move and live. Yellowhead Institute at TMU, based here at TMU, the Standing Strong Task Force at TMU, and then we have some Indigenous resources at the center as well. This workshop can be counted towards the Excellence in Teaching program. So the Excellence in Teaching program is designed to provide faculty and contract lecturers with opportunities to enhance the impact of their teaching and participate in a community of educators committed to excellence in teaching and learning. So as part of the program, it's expected that you complete a certain number of workshops that are offered through the center. And so by being part of this workshop today, you can have this workshop counted towards some of those requirements. In addition to the workshops, you'll get a chance to design and redesign courses and learning experiences, collaborate with colleagues and center staff, including myself, receive recognition for professional development in teaching. And so not only do you gain valuable skills and knowledge to enhance your teaching, but we also provide you with some tangible things that you can include in your teaching dossier to demonstrate your teaching excellence. And then you'll also get a chance to participate in a supportive community of educators and mentors. I've only been at TMU for a few months, and one thing I've noticed is that the people who go through the ETP do often continue to work with our center to improve on their teaching or to reflect and improve their teaching. So it's a great way to not only develop connections with the center and improve your teaching through the program itself, but it's a great way for you to continue to work with the center and to continue to learn about opportunities to enhance your teaching. So I really encourage all of you here, if you haven't already, to consider enrolling in the program. Who am I? My name's Jackie, like I mentioned. I'm an educational developer here at the center. And I'm specifically specialized in program evaluation and the scholarship of teaching and learning. So prior to my time here at TMU, I was a PhD student at the University of Ottawa, where I contributed to some national and international projects focused on improving and studying equity, diversity, and inclusion, so EDI, in science education and research. I currently serve as not just a peer reviewer anymore. Actually, I was just appointed as an associate editor for the Canadian Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and I serve as a peer reviewer for the Journal of Chemical Education and the Journal of Science Research and Science Teaching. And so I think I bring a lot of expertise to these conversations about SoTL and educational research, and I'm really excited to be able to have an opportunity to share and build a community of SoTL scholars here at TMU through workshops like this. If there's anything in this workshop that we don't get a chance to talk about that you would like to learn more about or talk more about, I'm always available for a one-on-one meeting or consultation to dive more deeply into any challenges or things you have questions about. I come to this work with a background in teaching at many different levels. And so my background's in chemistry, and I've taught not only in higher education, but at the K-12 level. And so this is a photo of me teaching a science summer camp based out of UBC's Okanagan campus. And so this was a science summer camp for K-12. And then I've also taught, I've TA'd quite a bit, both as an undergrad and a graduate student. One thing that was really cool about UBC Okanagan is that because it was a smaller school, I had a lot of opportunities to practice teaching and develop my teaching as an undergraduate TA. We also had something called supplemental learning at UBC Okanagan, where basically I would serve as a supplemental learning leader for a specific course. And so I would go to the lectures for the course, and I would develop supplemental material for the course to support students, and students would come to these voluntary sessions where I would lead them through active learning activities based around the content from the course. So it was a great way. I've had a lot of great opportunities to reflect on my teaching and think about my teaching deeply. And I think one of the big questions that comes up for me still today is, how do I know, what I'm doing in the classroom, what I'm doing with students is effective, is useful? And I'm sure a lot of you have those same questions when it comes to this kind of work. And that brings us to SoTL. So SoTL is a endeavor. It's a field of inquiry that's focused on improving student learning and educational experiences. It involves students as partners in inquiry and learning. It's guided by questions that we have as instructors that are grounded in our local context and current knowledge about, what students might be going through, what we might be experiencing as instructors. SoTL is conducted using sound and ethical methods. We share our findings with each other, so both researchers and educators. One of the core tenets of SoTL is that it's not scholarship until you share it, and it includes a clearly defined research lens. And so SoTL is multidisciplinary. So it's likely that many of us here today come from very different disciplinary backgrounds with very different expectations about what teaching looks like, what research looks like. And so it's important that when we do SoTL work to clearly define the disciplinary and the research lenses that we're bringing into this kind of work. This is just a visual representation of what I just talked about. So SoTL seeks to improve educational experiences. So focuses on teaching and learning. Student partnership is one tenet. It's ethically grounded, also grounded in the local context, and the learning is shared with others. And one thing that's becoming more prominent in SoTL, and I think in educational research more broadly, is centering equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in all these conversations and all these projects that we engage in as researchers, as researchers and as educators. This was a slide I shared in last month's workshop. So these are the stages of a traditional, quote unquote, traditional SoTL project. So we identify a problem or question. So this could be a problem or question you have about your teaching or what's going on in your classroom. Conducting a literature review related to that problem or question. determining whether you need research ethics board approval, and if so, applying for that approval, gathering and analyzing evidence, and then sharing your findings with your peers. We're going to be focusing on the stuff I have with arrows here. So refining our research questions and why that might be an important thing to do at the outset. And then we're going to talk a bit about gathering and analyzing evidence, because I don't think you can really talk about your research questions unless you also think about how you're going to be gathering and analyzing data and evidence. So the learning outcomes for today, by the end of the session, you will be able to define what research questions are and why they're important in SoTL, identify the 5 components of good and researchable research questions, and use these 5 components that we'll talk about to reflect on and revise your SoTL research questions, including your own if you have any. Is there anything else that people want to discuss today? And you're welcome to comment in the chat, or are there any questions that you would like answered today that you don't see being addressed in these outcomes that I have? Give us a few seconds to think. No, all good. Okay. Maybe so. It'd be great if you have some questions. That's awesome. If you have some thoughts about what you might be interested in when it comes to a SoTL project, that's great. If you don't, that's also fine. We're going to be going through some activities where you'll get a chance to reflect on and revise your existing questions. But I also have some example topics and questions to support those who might not have anything concrete just yet. All right. What is a research question? And what is it not? So let's start with what is not. A research question is not a purpose statement. So purpose statements state the overall focus for the study. They're not hypotheses. Hypotheses are often used in quantitative research, and these are ways for us to state predictions about the outcome of a relationship between different variables. So it's sort of like an I think statement. They're not research objectives either. So objectives state the intended goals to be achieved in the study, that they are really related, quite related. So they often start with 2. And then so research questions are questions that narrow the purpose statement into specific questions the research can investigate. So they're measurable, like Claudia mentioned, right? There's something that can be answered. There's something that you're curious about and give you parameters of what you're going to explore. So parameters I like. One word that really jumps to mind for me is they set boundaries about what we care about when we collect data and how we analyze that data. And then Beverly, something specific. And so they're very focused. You're not, I guess that sort of follows on Elizabeth's point about, setting parameters, setting boundaries about what we're trying to focus on. Why are they important? So research questions narrow, that's the definition I just shared on the previous slide. They also guide research at all stages of a project. So I remember in grad school, so my research supervisor in grad school was Dr. Alison Flynn at the University of Ottawa, who's a renowned chemistry education researcher. And one of the things that she always, anytime I was stuck in my research or anytime I had questions for her about how things could look or how things could go in the project moving forward, she would always ask me to think about what the research questions are and why they're important. And so these to me are sort of the compass of your work. They can guide your work at all stages of the project. At the beginning, they outline your research study. During, they help ensure that you investigate findings and data that are relevant to your questions. And at the end, they help you make conclusions that are relevant to and hopefully answer your questions. And so again, they set boundaries, they serve as a guide, they serve as a compass for your project. I think also from a SoTL perspective, because ideally, again, SoTL is work that is shared with others, they also help focus the attention of readers and reviewers of your work. I've read many SoTL manuscripts in my life, and I will say with some certainty that it's always easier to follow what's going on in a manuscript or in a presentation when it's very clear what the questions are. And so even with manuscripts that have some of these previous examples, like purpose statements, hypotheses, objectives, sometimes it can be really challenging to understand what the goals of the project are if there aren't very clear, defined research questions. So what are the five? So what is the problem you wish to investigate? There are some common questions that we like to tackle in SoTL. The first is what works. So an example of this might be do weekly quizzes, improve students' understanding of key concepts in science courses compared to a midterm only assessment structure. So it's thinking about, some of the question I posed to myself when I was sharing my story earlier in this workshop, thinking about, is what I'm doing in the classroom, is what I'm doing with my students working? Is it effective? And then a follow-up question, why does it work? How is it working? Why do weekly quizzes lead to improved understanding, if at all? So it's thinking about what is effective in the classroom and why might it be effective. These are just two common examples, and I would say probably the two most common examples in SoTL and educational research. But if you basically any sort of question that you can connect back to improving student learning and student experience can be considered a SoTL problem or a SoTL question. Okay, so what are the 5 components of good and researchable research questions? So this comes from Diane Bunce, who's a chemistry education researcher. Her article is linked there at the corner of the slide. And she talks about how there are 5 components of good and researchable research questions. The first is it identifies the problem. The second is that it's feasible. 3, it identifies who the participants are. 4, it identifies how you will measure what you want to know. And 5, it has a potential take-home message. And so if we transform these into specific questions, you can ask your research questions. It's thinking about what is the problem you wish to investigate, which we just did. Is the problem feasible to study? Who will you be studying? How will you measure what you want to know? And what is or are the potential take-home message is? Why is this work important? So we've done step 1 already. So we'll dive into step 2. Is the problem feasible to study? So this is just an example, one of the examples I shared earlier. Do weekly quizzes improve student understanding of key concepts in science courses compared to midterm only assessment structure? Feasibility can really depend on the number of factors. I think I remember one of the questions that I just saw on the sheet was fairly general. I think it was like, can students apply stuff they take from the course into the real world? That could be a really challenging question to study. And so it's important to think about feasibility at the outset when we think about the questions that we ask. Even a question like this, where it can feel very specific, can be a place for you to start thinking about whether the question itself is feasible to investigate. When I think about a question like this, I think about things like logistics. How am I going to administer and track weekly quizzes, right? How am I going to gather data from these quizzes? How am I going to administer them to students? Is that equitable, or certain ways of administering quizzes more equitable than others? Measurement. How do I measure understanding? So if I'm talking about students' understanding of key concepts, what am I defining as understanding, and how am I going to gather data that's a valid measure of understanding? If I'm comparing, so in this case, I'm comparing weekly quizzes as an assessment strategy to a midterm only assessment structure. Do I have a comparison group? Is there an equivalent course with a midterm only structure that I have available to me for data collection? Ethics. Do I need ethics approval? Right. So I would say one of the biggest challenges that first-time SoTL scholars have is navigating the ethics process and doing that in a timely fashion. And so do you need ethics approval? Are you able to get that within the timeline that you've proposed for the project? And then money. Do you have funding to pursue this research? Do you need funding? If it's a voluntary project where students are participating, for example, if they're voluntarily participating, are you going to compensate them? And if so, how are you going to compensate them? And so these are all questions that you might start to think about when it comes to thinking about the feasibility of your projects and the questions that you ask. Who will you be studying? Do the intended subjects match those you are investigating? So again, if we think about this question, I think this one's a bit more straightforward than the others. If you're explicating in your question that you're going to be looking or studying students in science courses, so that's your intended population, but you only have access to students in a chemistry course that you're teaching, maybe it's worth reconsidering who you focus on in your research question. So if you only have access to students in a chemistry course, maybe it's, do weekly quizzes improve students' understanding of key concepts in a chemistry course compared to a midterm-only assessment structure? How will you measure what you want to know? So there are two sort of schools of methodology in SoTL. There are quantitative methods. These are methods that are generally well equipped to tackle questions about how many, how often, how much. And so these are quantifying questions that seek to gather numerical data and employ statistical methods to quantify differences in attitudes, opinions, behaviors, etc. Because we're working with statistics most of the time here, we want to gather large sample sizes, which can make it difficult to gain a deeper understanding of why or how. So if your research questions seek to gain a deeper understanding of why or how students are feeling a certain way, for example, maybe a quantitative approach is not the approach that you want to go for. However, if you're trying to compare different groups, for example, in the example that I shared with the midterms versus quizzes, that would be one that I think makes sense for a quantitative approach, because I'm trying to compare how students are performing in these two different assessment structures. So some common approaches here are surveys, tests, longitudinal studies. Qualitative methods, these are the methods that are better equipped, I would say, to tackle how and why questions. So these seek to explore a single central phenomenon, such as underlying stories, reasons, opinions, feelings, motivations, etc. They offer rich, detailed data, and oftentimes we're limited to smaller sample sizes here because we are, spending much more time with individual participants in these types of studies. We're often limited in how much time we have to, talk to many different people. So we're often limited to smaller sample sizes. Interviews, focus groups, ethnography, case studies are common examples of qualitative methods of inquiry. So some examples of this. So like I mentioned, this is an example of, I think, a question that could be really well positioned for a quantitative approach. So do weekly quizzes improve students' understanding of concepts in a chemistry course compared to a midterm-only assessment structure? So the independent variable that I'd be curious about here is whether a quiz or a midterm is a better way to support student understanding, or sorry, weekly quizzes or a midterm only is a better structure for supporting student understanding. And so the thing I'm measuring at the end is the dependent variable that's influenced by the independent variable, so the thing I'm changing. One thing to keep in mind with quantitative work is that there can be many confounding variables. And so these are variables that you may not have accounted for and may not be able to control in your project. So these might also play a role in this relationship. And so this could be things like instructors' attitudes or behaviors, differences in student study habits between the two groups. And so I won't get into, I guess, too much of the details about quantitative methods today, but this is just an example of what this might look like and what sort of questions these types of methods are well equipped to tackle. In February, we're hosting a quantitative methods in SoTL workshop. So if you're interested in learning more about this, we're going to be talking a bit more about this in Feb. qualitative methods. So these are questions that seek to answer why or how. So why do weekly quizzes lead to improved understanding in a chemistry course? So maybe, so in these cases, we're focused on a central phenomenon. And so in this case, maybe it's students express beliefs about the impact of weekly quizzes on their learning. And so we could probe through interviews, for example, students' learning and assessment preferences, their beliefs about learning, their attitudes towards the subject of chemistry, and maybe their experiences in other courses. And so these are methods that really seek to develop a rich, explorative understanding of students' experiences, their beliefs, their motivations. Again, in January, we're going to be talking about qualitative methods in a workshop as well. Cool. All right. These are some examples of quantitative and qualitative data. I thought I'd just throw in. So quantitative numbers, graphs, stuff like that. Qualitative, oftentimes in the manuscripts we shared, themes. So students within the team, and then examples of this theme, students within the team, demonstrated through quotes from participants. So very different types of data collected using very different methods. What is /R the potential take-home messages? So when I'm thinking about potential take-home messages, thinking about what will be learned, why is this work important, and who cares? This was a question that always challenged me. Who might care about this work? Why should people care? Why is this important? And so I think it's important to think about this particular question at the outset when we're defining and building our research questions. One of the core tenets of SoTL is that it works to improve student learning and educational experiences. So this can include many different things, contributing to teaching strategies in the discipline or subject area, application of the outcomes of the SoTL inquiry in other disciplines and contexts, changes in institutional processes and policies, higher quality of learning and teaching at your institution, nationally or internationally, strengthening student-staff collaborations through partnership, and then strengthening your own practice and career progression. So I think one of the things that could be helpful to contend with early on and throughout your projects is how you ask your question should, I think, keep in mind what you want people to learn from the answers to your question. Again, one of the things about SoTL is that inquiry only becomes scholarship when it is situated and shared within existing literature. So we have these isolated units of knowledge from individual studies on the left here, and it only becomes scholarship once we share that knowledge with other members of our communities and connecting the work that we do with other projects. This is just a visual of the cycle of questions that I've posed to you throughout this presentation. So what issue do you want to address? We're going to brainstorm some research questions, which we did. Thinking about, is it feasible? What's known? Who and what will be studied? Your data sources? How will it be investigated? Through what instruments and methods? What is the potential take-home message? An additional thing you might consider are what are your knowledge, biases, and assumptions? So thinking about that EDIA component. And then how might you improve this question, your questions, with these questions that we've posed to ourselves? Here are the references from today's talk, and there's Diane Bunce's article. If folks are interested in reading that. This Cresswell textbook is also really valuable foundational text on educational research. And as we wrap, we're always trying to improve these workshops. This is, again, the first time that we're running these SoTL workshops. And so if you have any feedback on how things are going, please respond to our workshop feedback survey with any thoughts you might have. And that is it for me. I'll stop here if anyone has any questions or wants to chat further. But thank you all for being here, and I look forward to working with all of you as you continue on your SoTL journeys.